Here's a question for you. When I started, and it was before you were on the course, but I was with the NBC crew. It was always kind of taught to us by Tommy Roy, our mentor, to be neutral in the Ryder Cup and kind of take your American golf hat out now. Is that changing slowly as we get further into the Ryder Cup? Can you put your American hat on this week when you're out there?
I don't believe I can. Certainly it's going to be fascinating with McGinley and Faxon, who are going to be, in a sense, speaking for their respective countries, and in a sense, I assume, rooting for them to a degree relative to the commentary they make. But for our position, Mark, that you know so well, out there on the golf course, I think it's incredibly important to remain as neutral as possible.
Bones, how about this golf course in particular? Let's go back to 2002, kind of launched the cult of Phil Mickelson, the idea of the People's Open. He played well in 2009 as well. A Ryder Cup here. Public golf course, as public as any we ever see in a calendar year in golf. What do you expect in the mix of Ryder Cup and Bethpage Black fans in particular?
I'll never forget, Phil made a big putt on Saturday of that 0-2 Open. He was very close to the lead. I remember walking off the 17th green and just the incredible noise that you heard once the putt went in. I remember walking off, there was a European TV commentator on the back of the green. He had tears in his eyes because it was just such a moment. And it was cool to witness where you were caddying, playing, watching, whatever the case may be. But I think, those types of scenes, the kind of passion that you feel here within the New York City area amongst our sports teams and ultimately here at the Ryder Cup this week is just something you don't get maybe anywhere else in the game. And I think that there were conversations very early on in that 0-2 Open about, could you imagine having a Ryder Cup here, especially with these finishing holes? And all these years later, here we are.
I was on that green that day, riding for Newsday in 2002. That's the second loudest roar I've ever heard. The first was 2006 Ryder Cup at the K Club when Darren Clark was introduced on that first tee. But it's something specific to the Ryder Cup. You just don't hear those kinds of things.
You're exactly. I was in that group that morning, in Friday morning in 2006. One of the most emotional things I've ever seen in my life. And again, it represents what the Ryder Cup is and how beautiful this sporting event is to so many people.
One thing that I'm real curious about, because you've been closer to it than any of us in terms of working with Phil Mickelson, who for a period of time was regarded as one of the top players in the world. Him and Tiger sort of going back and forth. Obviously, Tiger, winning a little bit more regularly. But why was it so hard to get those guys successful in the Ryder Cup? And how does the American side do that with Scotty? Is it Scotty's personality? I think he has a better chance of having a better Ryder Cup record. But, I mean, Phil and Tiger, their Ryder Cup records are pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you talk about them playing specifically together as they did in 2004, I tell people all the time that if you went and had dinner with Tiger and Phil, you would leave that dinner saying to yourself, well, that was fascinating, but boy, are those two guys different. And I think that it certainly bore itself out that particular Friday there in Detroit, Michigan area. But beyond that, I think that I'm certainly not worried about Scotty Scheffler because I think they found his partner in Russell Henley. Now, I'm a little concerned about Russell's length off the tee this week. This is a big golf course. He's not a particularly long hitter, but he is a gutsy player who makes big putts at big moments. We saw the amazing chip in he had on the 16th hole this year at Bay Hill to ultimately lead him to victory. I think he's Scotty's guy. And I think unless he plays himself out of that role, he will be there this week for Scotty. So I don't think they have to worry too much about what they're going to do with this, the number one player in the world that is ultimately on their team. So, again, you can't speak enough for how important the captain's role is this week. I used to think, back in the day when I got started in the early 90s at this event that, you just roll these guys out there, the 12 guys with a pair of khaki pants and a golf shirt, and you let them decide ultimately what's going to happen. But there's just so much more than people might think in terms of the captain's role, and I think that certainly Keegan's going to do one heck of a job for the U.S. side.
As you mentioned, Bones, you've been around the Ryder Cup now for 3 decades. You've seen and heard things that I'm guessing even Luke Donald couldn't have dreamed of putting in his virtual reality headset for his guys as preparation for what they'll hear this week from the crowd. Has the crowd dynamic gotten worse? Has the behavior on either side of the Atlantic deteriorated over the years you've been involved?
I'll say this. In my experience at Ryder Cups, and we're going back quite a ways, and one of these instances happened here and one happened in Europe, but I saw somebody tried to intentionally trip players and caddies with their umbrellas. They made their ways from a green to a tee at a Ryder Cup. And I also, at a Ryder Cup, saw someone, at the time with your cell phone, you could plug in certain numbers to get your own cell phone to ring and trying to get it to ring at the top of people's backswings. So this has been going on for years. And I think that, you're going to find a couple of stray apples in every bushel, every barrel in terms of the behavior on the golf course. No question about it. The Ryder Cup has gotten insanely big, if you will. It's a huge event. We see it all out here behind us now. But the reality is that some questionable things are going to go on, and it's just a question to me of how quickly they're addressed in terms of the security that are ultimately out there.
Pulling in phone numbers to make phones, that's some high-level
Dating
CIA
himself
stuff.
right now.
Who knew?
James Bond
Want to
stuff.
stick around for another segment? Well, let's have a great week. We appreciate the stories, man.
Thanks, guys.